The Power Factor Show with Rick, Steve, and Caleb. Episode 78.
You can find this podcast and others at Gun Rights Radio Network, gunrightsradio.com. Podcasting freedom.
Brought to you by Safariland and Hodgdon, the gunpowder people.
Okay, welcome back to Power Factor. Again, I'm today joined by John. We're going to talk about shotgun components. So we're literally talking holes, primers, wads, powder, shot, and more primers.
Gotta have primers.
Yeah. So let's start with holes. We kind of mentioned this in the first episode, is that unlike metallic reloading, it's not like there's just one hole or one thing out there and you use all of it. There are good holes and there are not so good holes, we'll call it that.
The big deal, I think, in shotshell reloading comes back to pressures. And the hull is going to dictate the components that you're going to pick, and it's all going to get to giving you safe pressures. There are straight-walled hulls. There are tapered hulls. Mm-hmm. And that's not the outside of it, it's the inside of it. And that gets to what the case capacity or case volume is. And depending on how the case is constructed, it could have a very tall base wad in it, or not as tall of a base wad in it.
And the base wad is the bottom part of the shot shell, just for jargon speak.
Right, that's where the powder sits on top of that.
Right.
That will then drive, the powder's another factor, because how much powder you put in it is going to fill the hull up, or not so much, which then drives you to a wad, because you need to have so much room in the hull to then get the payload into it.
Right.
However much shot it is that you want to load, there are wads that are designed specifically for the amount of shot by weight that you're going to be putting together. So that'll give you a stack inside the shell of, whatever the height is, so that you still have enough room to crimp it correctly. Or if it's real short, it'll be real concave and leak shot into your buckets.
Yeah, and that's really a key point, is that metallic loading, you just cram the bullet and set your overall length and you're done. You don't need to worry about it.
Just go.
Shotshell loading, you get the stack up of all the components, and you really have to have the right combination to get the right stack up. And if you get it wrong, like you were saying, is that you're going to have either crimps that are literally trying to bust themselves open because you've got everything crammed in there so tight that they're trying to escape, or you go to the opposite point where you're getting dished crimps. The thing is caving
which is
in.
Not good.
No, yeah. And the thing is that the crimp also sets the pressure, or can define the pressure of the overall load. If you have a really loose crimp that's trying to open itself, there's not a lot of resistance there. Conversely, if you're dishing,
or if it's crimped really deep, if it's dished, you've got, I want to say, the pedals, pushed down, and they're probably going to be open to start with and then close on the way by.
Right.
But you can set at the side of the hull the depth of the crimp. Ideally, they want them about 50 thousandths deep, but I've seen them, deeper than that and just, barely closed, but still closed at the center. So
let's talk here real quick about holes. John and I like shooting, we'll start with holes and basically work from the back end forward. So John and I like shooting the Remington gun clubs. These are a compression form one-piece hole that the base wad is literally built into the hole as part of the manufacturing process. They have a steel head on them.
Even though some of them may look like they're brass, they're not.
They're really not. In fact, an example I think here, like this is also another gun club type hole. It has a brass head, or what appears to be a brass head, but in reality it's steel with a copper wash, so to speak.
The STSs do have honest to God brass on them.
Right.
Which is a premium Remington hull.
These are a tapered wall hull, so you need to take that into consideration of using the right wad with it when you get around to that. Now, some other examples of holes is, and this is kind of interesting, in that the the Winchester AA hole used to be the hole that everybody reloaded about 20 years ago. I mean, these are a compression formed hole.
Is that a real one?
This is a real one.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a real one.
I gotta see this. Yep, it is.
Yep. So these were the ultimate holes many years ago. And then Winchester, in their infinite wisdom, decided to change the hull to now what they call the AAHS, which is supposed to be, I think, high strength, but there's debate about that. In order to maintain load consistency, and this is now, I think, technically a straight-walled hull with a inserted base wad that's put into it that makes it a taper.
In the base wad.
So they went to great lengths to get the taper to be, and the overall volume to be just right so that you could take load data for the old holes and pretty much use it with the new holes. The problem is with these is that there have been some reports of the base wad coming out of the hole and lodging or sticking in your barrel, which then you know what happens next. It's the old Elmer Fudd thing. You put something behind that and shoot it and your gun blows up.
There was another issue with those in that when the wad, the powder wad and shot cup, when it was put into the hole, would hang up on the base wad at the upper edges.
Right.
And not go into the taper and go in.
Yeah.
But other than that, it was fine.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly in terms of the number of times you can reload a hole, but the old AA's, these are probably good for maybe about, 5 to 10 times depending. And it depends on how hot you're shooting. I mean, if you're shooting target loads, they don't get burned up too much. If you're shooting really max pressure loads, they'll get burned up pretty quick. So 5 to 10 depending on what you're shooting. The new AA holes, I don't think these things last quite as long as the old ones from what I've seen or heard.
They don't have the wall thickness.
Right.
There's not as much plastic in them.
The Remington gun clubs are actually pretty thick, and these things, I don't know how many times. I mean, probably
10 or 12.
10 to 12 times, give or take. So that's one of the reasons why we really like these things. The other holes are examples of holes that are out there. These are some of the European ones. So Fiocchi, these are crap. Well, in terms of reloading,
they refer to them as Euro trash.
Yeah, Euro
holes.
trash is what you'll hear them refer to as. So, unfortunately, you go out, you get a deal, and that's the other thing is that you go out, you find a deal on holes, and you think, oh, I'm going to start reloading. Unfortunately, these are good for nothing. You throw them away.
There are people, though, that will pick those up. They'll load them once and then walk away from them.
Right, exactly.
Which is probably what they ought to do.
Yeah, that is an option for people. You load them once and then throw them. Rio holes, same thing. European hole, not good for really long, maintain reloading. Reload them once, throw them. The Federal Top Gun loads, some people actually, and these are actually a straight-walled hole. All Federals are straight-walled, and they have a technical name. It's German. It's like Riffenhauser or something like that, but it ain't right.
Riffenbach or something.
Fighter pilot.
No, that was no.
So I have heard of some people actually reloading these about maybe 2 or 3 times, so you can get a little bit out of them. Might be interesting to experiment. These have a fiber or paper base wad. So the problem is if these get wet and that fiber wad expands, they're useless because they change the internal volume. This is an example of a hole that's well exceeded its past prime. So you start ending up with things here.
A body split.
That. But first off, the mouth of the hole is starting to get pretty burned. The petals are beginning to break. But more important than anything, and you'll probably see a close-up of this, it's got a body split where you can see the gases have actually started to come out. So this one is well exceeded.
I'll load that once more and leave it.
A little bit of duct tape and some glue and it'll be good. So that pretty much covers it in terms of all the different types of holes you're going to see. But primarily you're looking at a tapered wall versus a straight wall, and that kind of dictates then some of the other components. Primarily the wad, because the wad you'll see tapered wads or known tapered wads work with tapered holes and straight with straight. However, there are
sometimes some
crossover there.
But I still don't understand that.
Yeah. So the next point here to talk about is primers. And I think the thing to keep in mind here is that there are 209 primers, and not all 209 primers are created equal. In fact, far from it. In terms of U.S. manufacturer, Remington, Winchester, CCI, and Federal. there's a thing called, I'm not going to get the proper...
Brilliance.
Thank you. And
It's like brightness.
Yeah, brightness. It's basically a measurement of the, so to speak, the hotness or the ejecta, if you want to call it that, of the primers. I think my understanding is that Remington's at the bottom and Federal's at the top.
I believe so.
And I'm not sure where CCI and Winchester fit in there.
And that's just generally speaking.
Yeah.
Because depending on the application,
that may not necessarily be true.
Changes.
Yes, it does. Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of holes. So primers. So if you go off and you see, a lot of times you'll see a given load data and they'll have a Winchester primer, and then you'll also see a Federal primer, and the Federal primer may take like a half grain less powder than the Winchester primer for that stack up of components using the wad, the powder, and that hole.
So, and that would probably be safe to use the Winchester primer in that load at that level,
right?
Because it's not going to make the pressure that it will with the Federal.
Right.
So,
right.
But that's why you want to have the recipe book.
Yes,
and check it out.
Check all that stuff out. And then there are the European primers, which are is it Cheatite,
Chedites,
Noble Sport, Wolf,
Fiocchi,
yeah. The thing there is that within a 209 primer, and we're talking just now physical dimensions, even within the American manufacturers, most all of them have the same or pretty close within a thousandths outside or diameter.
A couple of thousandths. Yeah.
But the height of them and the radius of those are different. I've been reloading Federals lately, and they seem to be taller than my Winchesters I was shooting before. The way I found this out is that in my primer tray, it seems like the top hinge door doesn't shut as well as it did with the Winchesters. So just an observation there. The real problem is that when you go to the European primers, they seem to be a couple thousandths in diameter larger than the American primers.
I've seen charts on that have they take and diagram the primer from the rim, if it's standing on the anvil
base,
itself,
yeah.
of the dimensions of the cup, and comparing each of the manufacturers and what the differences are. And I know that was in Trap Shooters magazine. I know it's on the internet. Hopefully, we can come up with a picture of that, and we'll put it in the show.
I do have the picture of it, yeah.
And
we'll put that up for you guys.
I've seen a lot of stuff on the internet of guys having problems, particularly stuffing a Fiocchi primer into a Remington hull.
Right.
I haven't. They go in.
Yeah.
And some of it, I think, may be the type of press that they're using too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because the press that I use pushes the hull onto the primer.
Okay.
Not the other way around.
Right.
So there's pressure on the base wad. It's pushing it all down onto the primer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of the presses will actually push the primer, just like on a metallic cartridge, push the primer up into the case.
Right.
And that may not want to go, and that can also dislodge base wads in fiber wadded hulls. So another reason I don't like them.
The issue, though, or one of the things, assuming that they are slightly larger, is that, let's say you start out with a Remington hull, okay, and it was a design with a Remington primer, and then you cram a slightly larger primer into it. Now all of a sudden you can't go back to the American primers because they will fall out, or there's a very good chance they will fall out.
That's all very true. I buy them 25,000 at a time.
And if you dedicate, you'll probably,
and it's like the hulls are going to be trash before I buy primers again.
Right.
And
but the thing is,
but it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, it is something to be aware of. And if you're not buying your primers at 25,000 at a time, and you're only buying them at 1,000 at a time, and you go out and you get a good deal on Fiocchi primers, and you go and you load all your holes, and then you go find a deal on Winchester primers, and you take those same holes,
may or may not
they
work.
May fall out.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, if you do that, dedicate those holes. You're literally now saying these holes have been sized to European primer size, and stash them away, and you may have to start separating your holes. I right now have just stuck all with American primers, so I'm either running Winchesters or Federals, but the Fiocchi, the Noble Sport, they are cheaper. They can be considerably cheaper. I'm paying sometimes in the order of about $125 to $130 for American either Winchester or Federal primers. I've seen the Noble Sports running at $109, $119, maybe even $99 for 5,000 of them.
Yeah.
So that is one way to get your costs down. Again, it all, comes together. But right now I'm just kind of deciding to stick with the American primers because I don't want to go and ream my primer pockets out and then all of a sudden have the stash of these holes and the stash of those holes. So at any rate, so not all primers are created equal, and really take that into consideration when you're looking at components, and don't go and just haphazardly swap primers and go, well, I've got these Federals, I was shooting Winchesters, so I'll just shove the Federal and it should be okay. The Federals are a lot hotter. But that can actually help, again, in the winter when the temperatures are colder, because those Federals are hotter. If you do find load data with Federals for whatever you're running,
That's
you
where
may
you
want
need
to switch
to go
that.
to the powder manufacturer's website,
Right.
and download, basically what you want to load with various powders and primers, and then go look at, what is safe,
Right.
and then go from there.
Right.
So I'm
Good
sure
point.
we'll have an image of this on
Yes.
the show too.
So I think we're up to powder at this point.
We didn't do wads. Well, yeah,
Well,
okay,
that's
we're
on
building
top
up.
of the,
Okay.
Yeah, we're going
Okay.
bottom to top. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of powder, like I said, I've always been a real fan of clean. I started out, when I started shooting 12 gauge, I was shooting it in the very early 90s. And this is kind of interesting in that I started out with shooting clays. It turns out clays was developed in 1992. Which I didn't realize at the time because I just started getting involved in shotgun reloading again. So I went and found clays and I started running that. So I was shooting shotguns for quite a bit up until about 1993, and then I got the IPSC bug. Okay, so I started shooting 45 ACP, which is where everybody should start with in IPSC. If Rick was here, he would tell you that you should start with 45 ACP in a 1911.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, duh. So it's kind of interesting because I started looking at load data for 45 ACP, and it's like, clays, that's perfect. I've got 8 pounds of clays. I'm loading shotgun with clays. I can use this.
For everything.
Yeah, I didn't realize, though, at the time that clays is the perfect powder for 45 ACP. I mean, over the years, I played around with different stuff, but clays in 45 ACP is the softest recoil that I have ever seen out there of any powder in 45 ACP. I mean, it is unbelievably soft in terms of just recoil. And it's also extremely clean.
It's quiet, too,
Yeah, it
in
is.
a handgun,
Right.
comparatively speaking.
Right.
And I
mean,
think that's one of the things that contributes to the illusion of how soft it is.
Right.
Because it's not loud.
Right. So the other interesting thing is also at that time is HS6. I was reloading clays for target loads, and I went out and bought HS6 for creating field loads. So I was running like 1.25 ounces for pheasant hunting. Well, it turns out that I later discovered HS6 works great in 9mm.
Yes.
If you want to create really hot 9mm loads, HS6 is a great powder for running hot 9mm loads.
There's a lot of guys shooting 9 major that use that.
Exactly. So there again, another benefit, and again, this is all completely by accident. I go out and I'm shooting shotgun. I buy clays for my 12 gauge target loads. I buy HS6 for my 12 gauge field loads. Then I start getting involved with handgun shooting. Clays for 45, HS6 for 9mm. I mean, I'm sitting perfect at this point. I've got all this powder, and I can just immediately switch over. And so there you go. So then, now I've got tons of clays sitting around again, and obviously I've mentioned before that I'm transitioning from IPSC back to shotgun. I've got my powder. This is like, I think 20 years old possibly. This isn't, because I've been running clays nonstop here and going through lots of it. But so the same powder I was running before for handgun is now everything old is new again. I'm back to shooting shotgun, and it works just as well there. You've been running international clays for using bunker loads. Why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about that?
I've shot a lot of clays out of shotgun. Didn't play with it with handgun because I didn't shoot 45 that much. But I started shooting clays and that other powder that's a lot like clays. And I liked it a lot because it's comparatively clean. It's not that expensive. A little bit goes a long ways, sort of.
Yeah, exactly.
But I wanted to go faster. I got to 7/8 of an ounce. I was pushing that at like 1,300 feet with clays, and that's
wow. That's got to be at the upper end of it.
It's for the different wad combinations. it's at the end of the line. It's something like 10.2 or 10.3. I'd have to go look at it, and I want to go faster than that. And clays won't do it because the pressure is too high at that point.
You're too close to the peak. Yeah.
So in looking at the forums, looking at the reloading guides, talking to people, a lot of guys are shooting international to go faster. And I think there's loads that go up to almost 1,400 feet with international at safe pressures.
Right.
To go 1350, when we chronoed, what I had put together is supposed to be about a 1350 load, and it averaged over 1375. But the book pressures for it were something like 9,200.
And they were really low pressure, which I was amazed at. Yeah.
It takes a lot of it. That was like 23.2 grains compared to 17.3 or something.
1,300 load.
I was going 18.3.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it seems like a lot, and then it messes up the reloader and all that. But this is another afternoon of fun.
Right.
But I really like it. It doesn't hit you hard. You shot it.
I was amazed because John let me shoot some of his bunker loads at probably 1370 at that time.
Yeah.
And I shot it back to back against my 1,200 foot per second load, and I was expecting to get whacked by it. I mean, you're looking at 170 feet per second faster than what I'm going or shooting, and I was just like, "You're kidding, right?" I mean, I could shoot these things all day long. It did not smack you around at all. I mean, there's a little. I mean, it's obviously more, but it's not
but it's
objectionable.
Not brutal.
No.
It's not even bad.
No. I mean, I've been whacked by a lot of really stout pheasant loads before, and you feel those things. But this thing is just. I mean, because
it's only 7/8 of an ounce, even though it's going fast.
Right.
And what I really like about it is like shooting Continental and the targets get out there, and like shooting your load, you go, boom, oh, there it broke. And then shooting this, it's like boom, break.
Bang, yeah.
It's just right now.
Yeah.
So
that's true. And that
I like it.
Right.
But what that does between the two powders, it changes the stack height
exactly
in a given hull.
Right.
Because I'm loading, it's like 16.2 of clays for skeet now, and 20. It was like almost 22 and a half grains of international,
right.
which I think is bulkier to begin with. Plus, you got the weight difference, and it takes a whole bunch more space in the bottom of the hull.
Right.
Which then gets to wads.
Yes, so we're now transitioning up the hole now to wads. There are a lot of different manufacturers out there making wads. You can stick with, I mean, Remington makes wads.
Winchester makes wads.
Federal makes wads. And then there's the clones.
The clones.
Yeah, so examples are Claybuster, Downrange, are probably the two that I can remember and probably the biggest ones. As an example here, in terms of wads, this is a Claybuster, what's called a 1118, and this is the clone of the Winchester AA 12 wad, their 1 1/8 wad.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right.
And
then,
you say the cup looks pretty big on it.
Yeah, well, that's the 1 1/8 ounce wad. And then this one is the Claybuster 1100, which is the clone of the Winchester AA12SL wad. And then there's another one that they manufacture, which is I think a 1078, which is a clone of the Winchester L wad, which is the gray.
I've got it right here. Yeah, the L wad.
Right, right, which is the 7/8 to 1 ounce load. So these are generally like the 1 ounce load. This is an 1 1/8, and then they make another one, which is even smaller yet. So those are the Claybuster wads. The other wad that I've been playing around with here lately is what's called a Windjammer WJ2, which is a 1 ounce load for target. Now the key thing that you can notice about these is that they have 8 pedals versus the 4 pedals of as an example, a Claybuster wad. The theory is that with the 8 pedals that they spread out faster and the wad falls away from the shot payload quicker and doesn't disturb the shot as it's going out into the cloud. And some people comment that the wad will literally run into or carry with the shot cloud and mess up the pattern. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I have two different, again here, Windjammer wads. There is the original Windjammer, which is 1 1/8 ounce wad. Again, these are really old. These are probably 20 years old. This is when I literally started out shooting 1 1/8 ounce before I just started transitioning down towards 7/8. And then the smaller 7/8 to 1 ounce load. But then you start getting into all these interesting designs of the cushion area of the wads, and it seems like everybody's got their own little take on it. There's literally I've looked at the patent, and don't worry about it. The patent for the Windjammer wad, about how they have all these little things here, and they're supposed to collapse, and the idea there is that as the powder's expanding and pushing, you want some cushion so you don't immediately ram into the shot. You want it to kind of compress and ease the load down the barrel. And there are many different variations and takes on that.
And you can begin to crush these or collapse them.
Yes.
When you load the shell, too, depending on what the stack is.
Right. And that's the other thing also, we'll talk about wad pressure briefly, is that the old method of loading was a fiber stack up. You had fiber wads, and then you had kind of the shot cup, and you had to literally put, in the load books used to say this, 40 pounds, 50 pounds, 60 pounds of wad pressure. You had to literally put pressure on that wad and compress it.
And the presses would have a gauge on them, so you could tell what was going on.
Yeah, and in fact, my mech press, which we'll see eventually, has that gauge in there where you can actually see your wad pressure. Does your Hornady have that?
The earlier ones did. Mine does not.
Okay, yeah.
Neither of mine do.
You have two of them?
Yes.
I didn't know. Geez, now I'm really envious.
Well, there you go.
So with the new plastic wads, basically all you want to do is make sure the wad is in contact with the powder. Some people will look for a little bit of movement. I've heard, like in the mechs, just basically verify that they can see that the thing's bottomed out. They just see the dial indicators come up slightly, and they know they've made contact. So you don't really need to put a whole lot of pressure onto it. And anything that you're doing there is really just compressing that cushion or shock area of the wad that you don't need to do. So there you go. So I think at this point we've moved up to shot. You want to talk about shot?
Okay.
All right.
There's different sizes for the games. For the shotgun sports, generally people are going to shoot 7.5s, 8s, or 9s. 8.5s have some popularity now. Between a 7.5 and an 8, the difference in the pellet diameter is like 5 thousandths. The big things in shots after size is hardness. There's chilled shot, and then there's magnum shot.
I thought there was something in between.
There might be.
Yeah.
But you're an engineer. You would go check that out.
It's how much antimony is in the shot. Yeah.
And
which can change the weight.
It does. Well, it changes for a given volume.
Yes.
So most of the recipes have a weight. A lot of the presses use bushings, and there'll be published bushing sizes for a given weight, but depending on the shot you have, the weight won't be there.
Right.
So there's a lot of adjusting.
As an example, mech has a designated, let's say, 7/8 ounce skeet load or skeet bar. And the idea is for skeet, you're shooting number 9, and you're going to get, not as much air gap there because the pellets are smaller.
And Hornady has different bushing sizes based on shot.
Oh, do they?
For weight.
Okay.
So like 7.5s for 1 ounce of 7.5s is one bushing. An ounce of 9s is a different bushing, and so.
And I know that also the different games, people will pick different size pellets for that. So obviously hunting, depending on what you're doing, but when I was hunting, it was either 4s, 5s, or 6s for pheasants. For dove, number 8s on that. But a lot of the sporting clays guys, or some people in trap or 5 stand, will like to shoot 7.5s because they just think that it gives them a little more retained downrange energy.
And they'll shoot an ounce and an 8, so they have the pellet count.
Right.
So if you go to a smaller shot, smaller pellets, you're going to get more pellets in a given charge weight.
Right. Trap guys there again a lot of philosophy. But 16 yards are probably going to shoot 8s, but you start backing up toward 27.
There's a lot of them that are just standard. It's going to be 7.5, an ounce and an 8. I don't care what it is.
Right. I pretty much settle on number 8s for everything but skeet. So if I'm shooting If I stand, trap, and I don't care what distance I'm shooting trap at, sporting clays, everything, I'm shooting number 8.
Yep.
7/8 ounce of number 8. And again, like I mentioned before, I don't think that the 7/8 ounce handicaps me at all. I break them or miss them just as well. If I'm on it, I'm either going to break them or I'm not going to break them. So it really, to me, doesn't matter. Other people have different philosophies on that, but regardless.
Well, for bunker again, 24 grams is the international max you can load.
Right.
And they're at quite a distance, and they break those things just fine.
Now, that's an interesting question. Are they using 7.5 or 8s typically?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
But shootingbunker.com probably
They
can.
probably could tell you there, yeah. And
I think they had both 7.5 and 8s
Yeah.
in the article that I looked at
Right.
recently.
Yeah. And then again with skeet,
Depends on the range,
that's
really.
true. Yeah, I mean, some ranges will literally say, as an example, Renton Fishing Game where we shoot at, no bigger than number 9,
Right.
because of the proximity to the pistol bays that are around there, and where they are, they just can't allow anything because the larger the pellet, the further it's going to travel, and that's a consideration.
And some of it also is the drop zone going the other way.
Yeah.
Because it drops by the road coming in. If you had bigger pellets, they'd travel further.
Right.
So.
But even without that restriction, I'd still shoot number 9 because you get more pellets
Yes.
in a given, volumetric area.
But I shoot 7/8 for everything, so I don't care.
Yeah. Right.
Just change the shot size.
Yeah. And I may explore 3/4. That might be interesting. So, you can pick your shot there based on your game you want to play, but a lot of people will go with number 8s for everything. I mean, in fact, you walk into any store, and typically they're probably going to have more. I mean, in some places selling shot, they're going to probably have more number 8 than they'll have 7.5.
7.5s, I think.
But
more 7.5s than anything.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Okay.
From what I've seen.
Yeah.
When I was buying it.
Well, that could also depend on who their clientele is, and also their relative position close to whatever range they are near to. I mean, if they happen to be near a skeet range, they probably would have a lot of number 9.
If that's what was required at that range.
Right. Yeah. So I think
we pretty much built it. We just haven't closed it yet.
Okay, so let's close it. Not the episode, but it. All
the
right.
whole.
So you are a fanatic on crimps, but here's a question for you because I don't know the answer.
I just don't want them to look like an amateur did.
Yeah. So what is the reasoning between a 6-point and an 8-point in terms of crimp?
That's how the factory did it.
But why would they pick 6-point over 8-point?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Because I've had gun clubs that are marked gun club.
Yep.
And they've been 6s.
Yep. And 8s.
And 8s.
Right. Yeah.
As far as the crimp.
I think an 8-point is a lot more visually appealing than a 6-point. A 6-point to me is ugly.
A nicely done 6-point.
Still, I think
I have some I can show you.
Yeah. I don't know what a nicely crimped 6-point looks like.
Here, let me get one.
But I mean, I just think a number 8, it's easier to crimp. It looks nicer.
I don't know if it's easier to crimp or not.
Now, my experience it is.
Well, and that could be related to your press.
My press, yeah.
And the Hornady press has crimp starters that have the 6 veins in them or the 8 veins in them. And they also have a crimp starter that's for a paper hull, which has no veins in it.
Right.
So that's what I stuck in my press, and I don't care if it's a 6 or an 8, it'll come out and the crimps look good.
So I was going to say here real quick, and then we probably just talk really briefly about Shotshell Reloading presses. There are single-stage presses and there are progressive presses. And a single stage, basically you move the hull from station to station, and a progressive is that you are literally doing an operation on we'll say multiple hulls.
Everything with one pole.
Right. So what you're doing there is literally feeding holes, feeding wads.
And hoping for the best.
Yeah, and hoping something pops out the other end. There are obviously advantages to the progressive over a single stage, but to give you an example, John's press is the Hornady 366, and street price on that's probably around $500, give or take.
That, yeah.
You can reload. You said you reload about 100 shells in 10 minutes, give or take.
Around.
Yeah.
A primer packet's worth.
Right.
If I don't screw something up.
Yeah. My press is the Mech Size Master, and street price on that's probably about $250. So it's roughly half the price of yours. It's a single stage press, and if I'm going at a good rate, we'll call it that. I'm not going excessively fast, but I'm also not, dawdling and taking my time and whatnot.
You can't go fast.
Well,
you can try, but you can't go fast.
I can reload about 8 boxes an hour, about 200 rounds an hour. So you start looking at this from just a time standpoint. It really depends on how much you're shooting and what your time is worth to you. In 1 hour, I can reload 200 rounds. In 20 minutes, you can reload 200 rounds. I mean, to me, I can only really, a mental capacity of reloading for about an hour, and at that point, it's like I'm done with it. I don't want to reload anymore.
You need to walk away for a while.
But the thing is, if you're not shooting a whole lot, then 200 rounds, an hour or whatever, and again, that's moving at a fairly quick rate, may be sufficient. So I've heard kind of people will start weighing what is the number of rounds you shoot a month, and where is the breakover point of when you should really consider going to a progressive versus sticking with a single stage. And I think the number is probably around 300 to 400, possibly, because I'm shooting now around 400 to 500, and I'm beginning to kind of feel God, this just seems like I'm out here depressed for a long time reloading ammunition so I can go shooting mode. And I'm really thinking possibly that there might be a Hornady 366 in my future. So,
or a Spolar Gold, or a Posnus Warren, something or other.
Yeah, something that
or a Dillon 900.
And that's the other thing, is that Dillon makes a really nice press. I've seen them in operation, but it seems like, from what I've heard, the standard in terms of what you get for your value, for your money, is that the 366 really has everything beat.
I think it's really hard to beat it for the features that it has, how it's constructed, the ruggedness of it, the support that Hornady has for it. And you can buy them used for $250 in really good shape.
Right.
And if you don't want to rebuild it, change the parts out on it, send it to Hornady, and they'll do it. And it's not expensive.
Right.
So
there you go. Something to consider. I mentioned before I started with 16 gauge. I actually was using a Lee Loadall. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh, no.
And back in the day, and this will be in the probably early 70s, it was $29.95. Yeah.
I like it.
But it worked. It got the job done.
So you sit down for about an hour and you're done.
Yeah.
I load the hopper up with a 25-pound bag, and just however far that goes,
so that
and then I'm
454 rounds.
It's about
450.
Yeah, real close. Well, is it really 25 pounds?
Yeah, hopefully.
Is it really dropping exactly 383 grains?
Right.
So
So for you, that represents about an hour. In terms of,
hour and a half. Yeah. Something always screws up, and I'm out here longer than that.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Right.
And it's a lot quicker to load them than it is to box them.
Oh, yeah.
Boxing just seems to take forever.
Well, I did the time on it once, and I think it was 6 minutes to reload 25, and I think it was 5 minutes and I was 5 minutes. No, it was 5 minutes and maybe 15 seconds to load 25, and then another 45 seconds to actually box them. But whatever. So, but again,
45 seconds.
Yeah, I timed it just for fun. But at any rate, so at some point, it's kind of like you need to judge for the future, and unfortunately, it's hard to say what you're going to be doing, because when I started shooting shotgun, the amount that I was shooting, the Size Master did the job. And I mentioned this before, when I was shooting metallic, I started out in a Lee Turin press, and that did the job. But then as I started shooting more, all of a sudden your time is worth money, and I progressed to a Dillon 550 progressive. And I'm beginning to kind of feel the pain, so to speak, of everything with using a single stage press. So who knows? I'll let you know what happens with that. So I think that about does it. Next episode you're going to see is...
Yeah.
You think so?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. Next episode you're going to see reloading in action, and it will either be reloading on John's 366, progressive, or on my Size Master, but you're going to see both. So you'll be able to see a comparison of reloading on a progressive versus reloading on a single stage. So that might help influence your buying decision in the future if you haven't bought a press yet, of which way you want to go. So anything to add?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I like my 366.
Yeah, I'm going to be very interested to watch that thing run, because that may actually push me over the cliff, so to speak, a lot sooner than I was.
We'll let you pull the handle.
Yeah, I'll pull the lever.
We'll give you a pack of primers and stand back.
Go for it. Yeah. Okay, if you have any questions, you can hit the website at powerfactorshow.com, email at powerfactorshow@gmail.com, Facebook at facebook.com/powerfactorshow. I'm just whipping these things out.
That was not
now.
even a challenge.
Yeah. So, again, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.